Is the Miata always the answer, as I'm often told? Or is Lotus always the answer? Or is it sometimes the answer? Or is it the answer when it's working? Hello Lotus, and welcome back to the most informative Lotus channel on YouTube. And in that spirit today, we are going to do a comparison video, the first in a series of actual comparison videos. We're going to talk about what it's like to live with and daily drive a Mazda Miata ND and compare that with a Lotus Elise. It's sort of an interesting comparison because a Lotus Elise on the used market, you can find a nice one for about $35,000. The same goes for a new Mazda Miata ND. They're about $35,000. And they can be almost half price if you find a used one. By the end of this series, hopefully you will know which car, the Miata or the Lotus, is right for you. So for our first test, we're going to talk about getting in and out of both the Miata and the Elise. Now, when you look at the Miata next to the Elise, the Miata looks like, it looks like a minivan in size. It's much physically larger, but for a lot of people, it's still a challenging car to get in and out of. I'm about 5'10", 180, so I'm relatively average height and weight, and for me it's relatively easy to get in and out of the car, but for folks who are different sizes and shapes, getting in and out of the Miata can be a challenge. So let's look at the way that I get in and out of the Miata, and we'll talk about kind of the motions that you're going to have to make to get in and out that are a little bit different than what you would have to do for a typical passenger car. So first we will open the door all the way, and then I will place my right leg in all the way down, and at this point I start to feel a little bit of strain in my thigh, and then I sort of twist and fall into the car. So for me, that's relatively easy to do, but if I were much larger or much taller, it would be a tighter squeeze to get in the car, and your knees will have to come up higher. And so depending on how athletic you are and how ambulatory you are, it can be a bit of a challenge to get in and out initially. You then have to bring up your left leg, and it's almost at your chest. I mean, you essentially have to bring it up as high as you can and then shift over to then be fully seated and looking forward. The seats have relatively tight bolstering, and for someone much larger than me, I could imagine it actually not being terribly comfortable. And so it's something to think about with the Miata. It's something that you probably want to try getting in and out of first before buying the car. Once you're inside, it's relatively easy, but still a bit of a stretch to grab the handle and pull it in. But once you're inside, it's a pretty comfortable place to be. Although even for me at 5'10" and around 180, it's still a pretty tight fit. There's not a great deal of room. I have a few inches on each side of my knees and in front of them, but not much more than that. The seat is adjustable. However, for taller folks, it should be noted that when you pull the seat back as far as it can go, it does cause some squeaks and rattles when you're driving the car, and the owner tells me that it is quite annoying. So that is something to think about if you are on the taller side. It should also be noted that the steering wheel in the Miata does not telescope in the 2016 to 2018 model years. In 2019s and newer, there is some adjustment there, so it's just something to think about if you're thinking about buying one of these cars. But all in all, as far as sports cars go, it's more challenging than a typical passenger car, but not extremely difficult, and it's something I think that most people can probably handle. To get out of the car, you then pull your left leg and your knee forward, set it down, and you'll have to put most of your weight and pressure on your knees. So if you have trouble with your knees, it could be a little bit challenging to get in and out of the car. You then rotate your other knee forward, step out of the car. You have to duck a little bit to clear it, but again, not impossible to get in and out of, but it's something you have to think about a little bit more than you would with, say, my daily driver, a Toyota Highlander. Okay, now that we've gotten in and out of the Miata, let's do the same thing with the Lotus Elise. So first, open the door, push in. Now you will put your right leg in as far as you can, which will require a bit of stretch. Once you have it in as far as you can, you will then sort of fall back, duck your head into the car. You will then lift your left leg up and rotate across. Obviously this is for a left-hand drive car, not a right-hand drive car, but you would reverse that if you are in parts of the world that drive on the wrong side of the car. Now, once you're in the car, you can easily grab the door handle and close it. It's closer than on the Miata because everything inside the car is closer than on the Miata. So now I will demonstrate getting out of the Elise, which is its own other process. First, open the door. You'll then lift your leg up, and you've got to lift it up pretty far, and then come out. And then for just as an example, like as I'm seated now, I can't reach the floor. So you have to push out of the car and kind of lean your elbow against it and extract yourself from the vehicle. What you don't want to do with the Elise is grab either the windshield or the steering wheel in order to give yourself an assist getting in and out. You can break the surrounding area for the windscreen, which is a super difficult part to find and replace. Same thing with the steering wheel. It's just not designed to have stress from that angle placed on it in that way. So often when people are getting in and out for the first time, they will grab those things to assist them, but it's something that you don't want to do if you can avoid it. You know, putting a little light pressure on it now and then, not a big deal, but do not put all of your weight on the windscreen or the steering wheel in order to help extract yourself from the Elise. So in this particular test, I think the Miata has to win overall, although the Elise should get 1 point for style, because getting in and out of this car, once you know how to do it, well, you know, it's sort of a badge of honor and an impressive thing to do. There are two kinds of people in the world, those who know how to get in and out of a Lotus Elise and those who do not. One thing to note, however, when you're talking about daily driving this car, you know, getting in and out, once you know how, it's not so bad. But if you forget your briefcase inside of your house because you still use a briefcase, you know, you have to getting in and out over and over and over again. Gas station, you know, you're doing a long drive and you have to do it multiple times a day. That's where things start to get fatiguing. Doing it a couple times a day is not a big deal, but it's when you have to hop out over and over and over again that you start to really appreciate every other car in the world except for this one. For the next test, we're going to show what it's like to remove the top from both the Elise and the Miata. So, first things first, you need to roll down the windows in the Elise in order to take the top off. So first, you have to get in the car. In order to roll down the windows in a car with the touring pack, you first have to put the key in the ignition in order to get power for the accessories to roll down the windows. You can't do it without putting the key in the ignition. Once the windows are down, you take the key out, back out of the car. Underneath the top, there are two pins that you push in, and then you roll it about halfway. And go to the other side of the car, press in the clips here, again roll it about halfway. At the top, I then place it in the passenger seat temporarily. So beneath the top there are these two spines that are made out of flexible plastic. You'll press in order to remove them from their notches. Passenger side first and then the driver's side. Okay. You could leave the top off to be your passenger in the Elise. It's a nice quiet passenger, doesn't weigh too much, but most people are going to put it in the boot. So now you go to the rear of the car, insert the key, lift the boot, and support it. Now it should be noted that my car has the Sector 111 lid bone, which makes it a little bit easier to do this in one motion. A stock Elise will have an arm that you will lift up to support the deck lid. I'll place the top is now more or less fully inside the boot of the car. And now lower the deck lid, press down to close, and you have a topless Lotus Elise. Easy as pie. In order to put the top down on the Miata, you reach up, there's only one latch, not two like a lot of convertibles have. Loosen it, push the top back and down, and it will click into place. So the Miata gets a point there. That was a lot easier than on the Lotus Elise. But with the Lotus Elise, you get more exercise, so it gets a point for exercise. For our next test, we're going to look at storage space in the trunk and the boot of the Miata and Elise respectively. Now, what we have here is a Pelican 1510 hard shell case. It's a roller case. This is the largest allowed carry-on size that you can take on a normal commercial flight. So it's a good test because it's something that a lot of people will use, you know, for all kinds of travel, and something that is nice to be able to put in the back of the car. So we will now see if either of these vehicles can handle a hard shell large carry-on bag. And it easily fits in the Miata with quite a bit of space all around it afterwards. So you could also stuff in other things here, and it looks like we've got plenty of space to work with. Another advantage here of the Miata is that since you don't lose space by putting the top down, you can still easily fit this hard shell carry-on case in the back of the car. So the Lotus has a smaller boot than the Miata, but if squeezed in and Tetrised carefully, the hard shell case can fit in the back of a Lotus Elise. Now, I think it would be a really, really tight fit if you were to do this with the soft top in the back of the car. It looks like it would just clear it. But one thing to note about the Elise that's a little bit different than virtually any other car, because it's a Lotus, there's no padding or protective material inside the trunk itself as it comes from factory. And so when you're driving quickly or going around turns, items in the back can shift and they can damage the rear clam of the car. So it's something you want to think about when you're packing. You want to pack it very carefully so that you have soft items around any hard items, so that if you go hard around its corner, which you should be doing in an Elise, that you don't risk having objects in the back pop through, crack, or damage the car. There's also the wiring for the rear tail lights is exposed inside of the car here. There's nothing around it to protect it. It makes them easy to get to service, but it also means that things can bump into it, knock it around. And so those are things that you want to think about and be really mindful of when you're packing it. You have to really think about what you place back here and, you know, under what circumstance. It's not that it doesn't have space, but you have to be really smart about what you put back here. You don't want to put long metal sharp items, or, you know, your box of knives, don't put it back here if you're going to go to the track. I always take my box of knives out of the car when I go to the track. But that said, I think it is pretty useful information to know that you can fit a full-size large carry-on in the back of an Elise, so long as you have the top on. So in a way, both of these cars are winners of this test, but in another more accurate way, the Miata wins this test, because once you place a carry-on inside the rear trunk, there's still space to put additional items. You can put your box of knives, whatever you have. You can go to the track. It's not going to punch a hole through the side of the car that will total it out like you can do in an Elise. But on the plus side, you get to take a peek at the engine whenever you place something in the boot of the car, so Lotus gets a point there. Our next test is something that, well, hardly anybody would ever think about when it comes to most cars, but that is the 12-volt power port location in each of the cars and its functionality. So in the Miata, you would think that the Miata would have a very standard 12-volt port somewhere in the middle of the car, like any normal car, any normal Mazda, but no, indeed. The power port in the Miata is in the passenger footwell, way up deep into the footwell, way up there, deep. It's practically here. It's here, but underneath. Let's go in and let's take a look. You might be wondering why I'm on the ground. Well, in order to access the 12-volt port on the Mazda Miata, one must get on his or her knees and find the 12-volt port, which is placed way back here. I don't know what I would call it. It's really hard to say where this thing is. It's in an unknown part of the footwell. If you didn't know it was there, you would never, ever find it. The Lotus Elise is a little bit different. Now, this is the car you would expect to either not have a 12-volt port at all, or to potentially have one in a very uncomfortable position. However, the power port in the Lotus Elise is simply in between the two seats in this kind of tiny rear console area. So the 12-volt port in the Lotus Elise is actually much easier to access. However, it should be noted that there is a quirk surrounding the 12-volt port in the Elise as well, because the 12-volt port supplied even in the US spec Elises was actually the European size plug, which is slightly wider than the American style plug. And so if you place 12-volt male plugs into the female plug without modification, it will not fit quite exactly right, and you may have trouble with sort of intermittent power going to the plug. However, it is possible to swap out the female connector with an American spec, and everything will fit nice and snugly, as this one has been modified to do. So from a functionality standpoint, the Lotus Elise wins with the 12-volt port being easy to access, even though it's a little bit quirky. But the Mazda, well, it gets style points for its colonoscopy-esque 12-volt power port location, and so each of them gets a point. Next, we're going to look at the cup holder situation for each of the cars. The funny part is I can never remember how to put this thing in correctly. Cup holders were an option on the Lotus Elise, but most of the cars did not come with them from the factory. However, InnoKinetic or Sector 111 did provide a cup holder, an aftermarket cup holder option that's really popular, and you can actually use it on either side of the car. It installs with a racquetball, and so you place the racquetball in the cup holder and then sort of situate it inside there and kind of move it around until it's in place. Getting it out is, truthfully, the whole thing is kind of a pain, but it does work, and you can have it on either side. I tend to keep it on the passenger side because I can still easily reach it from inside the car, but that way it's still easier for me to get in and out of the car. By placing this on the driver's side, it makes it even more difficult to get in and out of the car, so I often keep it on the side here. So the ND Miata, as standard, comes with 2 cup holders placed here, sort of in the rear console area. The owner does tell me that, you know, you do bump your elbow into this a bit as you're driving, but it is there. Both cup holders can be removed and then placed back in easily without a racquetball. Additionally, the passenger cup holder can be removed from this rear console and placed in the footwell area so that you can have a cup holder here. You can then take this one out altogether if you didn't want to keep bumping into it. So from a functionality standpoint, the Miata clearly wins the cup holder battle, but the Lotus gets a point for style. So today we compared the ND Miata against the Lotus Elise on 5 important aspects of daily driving. We looked at getting in and out of the car. We looked at taking off the top. We looked at storage space. We looked at 12-volt power access, and we looked at cup holders. So all in all, if you want to arrive in style, the Lotus Elise is the clear winner. If you want to arrive, the Miata is the clear winner. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below us about what aspects of daily driving you're most interested in for a future video. We're going to keep doing more comparisons on the Miata and the Elise because I know there's a lot of interest in it. Tell me your experience in daily driving either a Miata or an Elise. In future videos, we're going to cover other aspects of daily driving both cars. We're going to look at infotainment, visibility, navigation, fueling, parking, going through drive-through windows, going through toll booths. That's an interesting one. Get an easy pass if you have a Lotus Elise. You don't want to try to pull a ticket out of the toll booth going through New York City. Just ask me how I know. Crowd management, air conditioning, infotainment, service, parts availability, availability of technicians who know how to work on these things, parking, passenger comfort, having passengers at all. We'll also answer any questions that you have. So leave a comment in the area down below us with your question about how the Miata and the Elise might differ in some aspect of driving that you're curious about. We will do everything we can to make that video for you. And thank you for watching, and live long and Lotus. The Miata is always the answer. The Lotus is always the answer. The Miata is always the answer. I don't know. I'm not sure either of them are the answer.